Well, it seems logical to kick off our discussions at dawn by asking the question, so what is ME? And I'm pleased to say that I'm joined today up on the mountain, albeit virtually, by Dr. Nina Muirhead, who is particularly well qualified to help us answer that question, as you'll discover. Gorida Nina, croeso. Welcome to the beautiful land of Wales. Perhaps you could begin by introducing yourself in terms of your academic background and professional roles and responsibilities, and very importantly, your connection with Wales.
So I'm Dr. Nina Muirhead. I'm an NHS doctor. My day job is in dermatology surgery, where I mainly work in cutting out skin cancers. I also have a personal and professional interest in medical education and MECFS education. I was an expert witness for NICE in 2021 for their guidelines, and have worked on chaired various meetings and working groups in terms of developing materials and improving attitudes in education about MECFS, and I am a director of Doctors with ME. My connection with Cardiff is that I have been a tutor on the online postgraduate course for dermatology since 2014, and I've also supervised medical students doing special study case modules on MECFS as well.
There's something else which makes you particularly well qualified to talk about this subject today, which is that you have ME.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could tell us about your experience of the illness.
So up until 2016, I was completely well. And then in September of that year, I developed a flu-like illness, and then multiple other illnesses over the winter, and spent 6 months becoming increasingly ill, eventually unable to work. By the summer of 2017, I was bedbound and spent most of 2017 and 2018 in the house and requiring a wheelchair if I had to leave the house on the odd occasion. I had a personal experience of needing to see 13 different doctors before getting a diagnosis. It took me a long time to understand post-exertional malaise, and I'm still getting symptoms every day, and I'm still unwell, but I've been fortunate in that my severity now is mild, but I was severe at one point, and it was really quite shocking and eye-opening to have that personal experience.
Okay, can I just pick up on one thing which you told me previously, which might illustrate how difficult things were. I think you had to move out of home when you were very ill, and
Yes.
you've got 2 young children. Can you say something about that and what that was, and what the reason?
So that was really hard. I was extremely unwell. I couldn't lift my 2-year-old daughter. I could barely engage in a conversation for more than 5 minutes. I couldn't really look after myself. I struggled to get through a meal, lifting the fork to my mouth, and I struggled to get out of bed. So it came to the point that my parents took me back to their house so I could completely rest and convalesce, because I couldn't function as a mother, and it was heartbreaking. It was really, really difficult. It was really difficult to tell the children how ill I was, and it was very difficult to admit how ill I was. As a mother, you just want to be there for them, and I couldn't at all.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say you're now mild, and maybe we'll talk about that a bit later on. What that actually means. What's the reality functionally when we say somebody's got mild ME?
Yeah.
People may be surprised, I think. So, what is ME? Can you sum it up? I know
Yes.
it's complex. But can
It's
you?
a complex, chronic, and often devastating disease that is largely underestimated by the medical profession. It affects all age groups, children as well as adults, and all socio-economic and cultural backgrounds. It tends to have a female preponderance. That means that more women than men have ME, and it often follows a virus, and sometimes it can come on over weeks and months with no obvious cause. But the person is essentially not able to function at their previous level, and has significant impact on their day-to-day life due to crushing fatigue, I mean, absolute exhaustion, but also sleep disturbance, problems with cognitive function, memory, multitasking, and orthostatic intolerance. And it's that combination of symptoms and the one key cardinal feature post-exertional malaise, the worsening of symptoms after sometimes trivial exertion, that can cause a flare-up. And that's the thing that's so tricky in terms of rehabilitation, because there's often a delay. So one day you may be able to do something, and the next day you can't.
Yeah, you said it's a chronic illness. So what does chronic mean, and what does it mean in the context of ME for people who've got it?
So chronic means that it's lasting for months and years, and there are many diseases out there that are chronic. A lot of skin diseases that I deal with at work are chronic. Eczema and psoriasis, they flare up and they die down, but you rarely say that you've cured a patient of these disease entities. And it's very much the same case for ME/CFS. It sometimes will have quite an obvious start date, but many patients who are either mildly affected or in remission will say that they're never as fully well as they were before they became ill. Unfortunately, there are other patients who have a slow and gradual deterioration over many years, and other patients who have ups and downs where they have seasonal changes in their level of functioning. So the course of the illness can be different for different people. So ME is not driven by thoughts and feelings. It is not psychosomatic or psychological. However, if you're ill day after day and whatever you seem to do doesn't help make you feel better, then it can be very anxiety provoking and depressing to be that ill. As with other chronic diseases, mental health is very important, and you need support and a good network of friends and family who understand. And part of the problem with ME is it's so poorly understood by the general public and by medical professionals that the person is not only fighting for understanding by those people, but they're also really unwell. And the sympathy that they should normally get and that sort of psychological support that they would normally receive is not forthcoming. And I think that is a really big battle for ME patients.
Yes, it makes the illness harder to bear, for sure. It's a biological illness. What's the evidence for that? Where have we
There's
got
mounting
in
evidence.
terms of research?
There's huge amounts of papers in the literature now, and more with a subset of patients who seem to have an ME/CFS type presentation following COVID. There's definite evidence of inflammation, including cytokine changes, neuroinflammation, and also changes in the vascular system. But many of these studies are small, and what we need is more funding to make the evidence more robust. And the other thing is we would like to find some, I'm going to say some biomarkers. So there has always been this idea of a biomarker, a single answer. But I think it's so complex, and I think there are different subsets of ME itself, that I think what we will find in the future is that we discover a combination of different results demonstrate that a person has a high likelihood of having ME, rather than it be a binary yes or no. There may even be people who are seronegative, like there are in other arthritis and rheumatoid chronic conditions where you have the disease but you're seronegative. So even if we do find a biomarker, there may be people who have the disease and don't test positive.
The link to a virus as a trigger, we don't know which virus. That's one of the issues with ME, isn't it? We're not sure which virus, perhaps a number of viruses. In my son's case, we know he had parvovirus, generally a very mild disease, but after that he develops a lot of pain. Long COVID. Can you tell us a bit about long COVID and whether there's a link there, and whether that's changed our understanding of, or other people's understanding of ME, and whether it's likely to lead to progress in understanding ME?
So long COVID is a combination of lots of different problems following COVID that have gone on for more than 12 weeks after the initial infection. And it can include myocarditis or other changes, chronic changes with the lungs, fibrosis. So it can be, it can include other medically diagnosed conditions. But then a subset of people with long COVID are presenting with a really similar list of multi-system symptoms: the headaches, the sore throats, fatigue, sleep disturbance, post-exertional malaise, orthostatic changes, inflammatory type processes, rashes, changes in bowel habit, changes in cognitive function. A lot of people with long COVID are complaining of brain fog, difficulty multitasking, problems with memory and word finding. And these are all fitting into more of an ME type picture. The only difference is we know that COVID was the trigger for their chronic post-viral multi-system disease. So yes, I think it will bring answers, because there are a lot of people affected by this, possibly up to 1 million in the UK, of whom an estimated sort of 400,000 are still suffering with symptoms after nearly 3 years. So if those people are still not better in 30 years' time, that's going to be a huge economic burden for the country. And I think the government really need to invest more in getting to the bottom of the biomedical explanation for post-viral disease.
So in long COVID, we know what the virus was that triggered it. And one of the questions in ME and in long COVID, I think, is whether the virus is still there, lurking around somewhere in the body, whether it's active at a low level or it can be reactivated. So we know that some things, some viruses, which are very common, like cold sores, for example, can hide away in the nerves and reactivate from time to time, or perhaps the virus has been in there, done some damage, which we're trying to understand, and then gone away, but left the damage behind. Is that right?
Yes, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. There are some papers showing spike proteins, which are sort of sections of the COVID virus, for example, still circulating months and years afterwards. Some patients with long COVID are still testing positive on flow tests months afterwards. Those people biopsying the gut, for example, or looking at stool samples are finding viral particles, and they're also finding them in tissues of post-mortem patients. So there is mounting evidence there is a viral component and an ongoing viral response. There's also evidence of other viruses sort of joining in. Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus, human herpes virus, particularly HHV 6 and 7, are being found in patients with COVID who've been ill in ITU. They've also had other viruses re-emerge. So there's definitely evidence around immune system and viral involvement, but it's not just one virus and it's not just one answer. It's a lot more complex than that.
Now, many people associate ME with fatigue, being very tired. That's partly because of its other name, chronic fatigue syndrome. It's a name I really dislike, I think, and come with many other people with ME, because of its emphasis on fatigue. And you mentioned about earlier on in your own experience of what the fatigue in ME is like, but you also said that it's a complex multi-system illness. And our experience is that it's the other symptoms, including neurological symptoms, which actually are more disabling. They cut people from being able to access the normal things of life. Can you just tell us a bit more about the range of symptoms that people with ME can experience?
Yes, I think it's important to know that for people with severe and very severe ME, they can have multi-system symptoms that are significantly worse. So difficulty with sensory input, light, sound, smells, can even cause post-exertional malaise if they're becoming invasive to the person, but also difficulty with swallowing, difficulty with very basic activities of daily living, washing, dressing, brushing your teeth can be exhausting. Digesting your food can actually cause post-exertional malaise. Patients can have a lot of twitching and pains and stiffness in muscles and joints. So fatigue is barely scratching the surface. It's a little bit like saying you understand someone who's had a leg amputation because you've stubbed your toe before. It's a total underestimate of the absolute crushing exhaustion of every symptom, every system at every level.
That actually brings us on to my next question, which goes back to the statement which is on your website, Doctors with ME, where there's a summary about ME, and it says the illness often has devastating consequences. It has a worse quality of life score than many other serious illnesses, such as cancer, stroke, rheumatoid arthritis, and multiple sclerosis. That's a really big claim. Can it be true?
I have met and spoken to a lot of patients or people with ME and their families, carers and loved ones. And I have seen firsthand how terrible this disease can be. It can be severe or very severe, sometimes for decades. And in reality, that means that person needs full-time care, is often in a darkened, quiet room, needs help with every basic aspect of toileting, or they have a catheter. They will need feeding and food supplements. They need help with communication. Some patients or people with ME can't talk, sometimes for years. And not only is it impacting on their quality of life, but it's impacting on the quality of life of their family members as well. So the type of existence that a person with very severe ME has is almost aligned with end of life care for very sick patients who are dying. Yeah, it's sad.
Sorry.
It's hard.
We need to edit this bit out.
Well, or keep it, because that's how it genuinely feels.
Yeah. How come the doctors don't seem to know about this? How is it these patients who are so severe are actually hidden from view? And unless doctors and health professionals are willing to go to them, see them at home, they remain invisible.
Well, you sort of answered the question with the question. They are invisible. They are often behind closed doors. Patients are often invisible. And a lot of doctors, if they weren't taught about it, there's that element of shock and disbelief. If I don't know about this illness, how can it exist? Or if I didn't realize it was this bad, how can it be this bad? And it's been quite a revelation to a lot of healthcare professionals with the advent of long COVID and its range and severity of symptoms. And there's been such denial within the medical community and the government that they're treating long COVID as a completely different illness to post-viral ME/CFS, which is what they're essentially talking about when they're thinking about people who are still ill after 3 years with no other biological sort of results or biomarkers demonstrating why they're still ill after 3 years following COVID. And I think it's just, for me, it was a massive shock. I lay in bed for months thinking either I've got some really rare disease or the medical profession have ME completely wrong. And it took me a long time to get my head around the fact that it was the latter. And it was only when I saw 17,000 signatures petitioning against the old nice 2007 guidelines saying, you know, exercise doesn't make people better, that I thought, yes, they're right, it doesn't. Why don't doctors know about this? And I was so ill, I could barely string a sentence together, and yet I started advocating for patients even at that point. And I managed to record a very short video to show the ME awareness day, Millions Missing, I think in 2017 or 18, probably 2018. And I was still so ill But I knew I had to get this message across, and my message was most doctors don't know what ME is.
Yes. I'll just talk a little bit our experience. We have experienced of severe ME in the family. Both my daughter was severe for many years, now improved significantly, but still managing the illness on a daily basis. My son is still severe, very severe. 10 years ago, he became extremely ill, to the point where he was actually admitted to hospice. The palliative care consultant from the hospice came out to see him with the sister, following a multidisciplinary team meeting which we had at home with a number of professionals who recommended this as the place that could meet his needs. And they said, we don't know anything about ME, but his needs are at a palliative level. And so he was admitted twice to that provision. He spent the next year and a half being fed by nasogastric tube. He lost the ability to speak. We had a list of questions for him, and when we got to the right one, he'd squeeze our finger. He couldn't turn his body, couldn't turn his head, had to be toileted in bed, and the room had to be kept dark all the time because of his intolerance to light. And he had great difficulty tolerating even movement or voices within the room. And as you say, most people don't know that. The NICE guidelines, the new NICE guidelines, from our point of view, have made a difference because we've been able to use them. The previous ones were no use to us. They did not describe our experience of ME. The new ones recognise there's this different levels of ME severity, including severe and very severe ME. And there's guidance there about to health professionals about how health professionals should engage with patients and their families and carers. And that's made a big difference to us in terms of we've had some really good practice going on with our local specialists, not ME specialists, I should say, because you've got some other conditions, including home visits. Well, that needs to be recognised. That's what's it. Otherwise, these people are being lost. There's another quote actually, which you're probably aware of this quote. It's along these lines, really. So I think the concentration on fatigue in chronic fatigue syndrome and the emphasis on the idea that people are deconditioned and have become anxious about their condition and so on, and therefore need psychological help and physical exercise, which has now been largely overturned. The thing that makes me angry about that is that it's effectively given the medical profession a reason not to get involved, to downplay the seriousness of the illness, to not actually engage. So yes. How do they know? If they don't go to visit somebody's this severe ME at home, they'll never know what it's actually like. And when you go into somebody's home and you meet the people looking after them, see what it's really like, then you'll start to understand. So, and also that emphasis, the previous emphasis, has effectively stood in the way of biomedical research. So looking to the biomedical causes of the illness and potential treatments. And that, I think, makes people with ME very angry, actually. And they've got a case. There's a doctor called Nancy Klimas, who's director of the Institute for Neuroimmune Medicine in Florida, in a hospital in Florida, USA. She's a long-standing researcher into ME, and she also is a clinician. And she has two main areas of interest. One is ME, and the other is HIV. And she said this, because this is because of the difference in terms of research that's gone into biomedical research, and therefore the discovery of effective treatments. My HIV patients, for the most part, are hale and hearty, thanks to 3 decades of intense and excellent research and billions of dollars invested. Many of my ME/CFS patients, on the other hand, are terribly ill and unable to work or participate in the care of their families. I split my clinical time between the two illnesses, and I can tell you, if I had to choose between the two illnesses, I would rather have HIV. Now, the new NICE guidelines, right at the beginning of the new NICE guidelines, there are some descriptors of severity levels, and they go from mild to very severe. And we've just been describing what it can be like if you've got very severe or severe ME. Now, you said at the beginning, your ME is now at the mild level, according to the NICE description. But I'd like you to tell us what that means in terms of how you have to live your life, and what you're able to do in terms of to what extent you've returned to your previous level of functioning.
So for me, I would categorize myself as mild. Having said that, what that actually means is every day I have symptoms. I have to balance my work and life very carefully. I have to plan ahead, and I have to build into my week lots of rest days. So I can work half-time now, but it still takes me all week to try and do my half-time job. And I still can't do a lot of the things outside work that I used to enjoy, like running and cycling. I would love to do more activities. I have been fortunate that I've been able to go on walks with my family. And that has been a really big thing, a really big change for me. To be able to go for a short walk in the woods with my family has been such a joy. And I appreciate it so much, because there was a point when I thought I'd never be able to walk again. So I'm lucky that my ME is mild, but it still means I get sore throats, headaches, changes in bowel habit. I get muscle pains. I get a lot of brain fog and cognitive problems. And there are some days when I can't even read a patient letter, and yet I try and function as a doctor. So I have to space out when I do my work and how I do my work. And sometimes it has helped being able to work from home part-time to do my administrative tasks, because I can then do them when I'm functioning slightly better. But I am getting fluctuations week on week and month on month in terms of what I can do, and managing that is difficult.
So ME is often described as a poorly understood illness. To what extent is that true in terms of what we know from research, and to what extent is it true in terms of the medical profession's understanding and proficiency, their up-to-dateness?
ME/CFS is not only poorly understood, it's poorly diagnosed, with patients often waiting years for a diagnosis. And it's also poorly taught. So most doctors don't know what ME/CFS is. And most undergraduate medical education programs don't include ME in their taught courses. So something that I've been doing is firstly finding out and researching what is taught, and secondly identifying a need for online medical education tools. So I have written a 10 case-based series of questions, which are multiple choice, that anyone can sign up. They're free. All you need to do is register and log in. And it takes you through some of the key features of diagnosis and some of the areas of management, including some of the more recent research into new symptom management medications. So I think it's definitely worth having a look at that if you can. And it's aimed at all healthcare professionals, but even carers, family members, or general public can log in and try.
I've done it, actually. I did quite
Brilliant.
well.
Yes.
I think I got 9 or 10 out of 10.
Fantastic.
But one of the good things about it is it doesn't take too long, does it?
No,
no,
you can do it in about 10 minutes, although you will get a certificate saying you've done an hour of continued professional development. And it's because of all the reading and the questions are designed to pick up on common misconceptions, like it isn't psychological, and also to identify some potential future treatments. We touch on antihistamines and low dose naltrexone and some other treatments that may or may not in the future turn out to be helpful.
Okay. Well, I think we're coming near the end of our interview. We've packed in a lot. Are there reasons to be hopeful?
Yes. I feel very hopeful, and I always have. And I think the point you made about people with ME tend to be resilient, hope is really important for that. And every day I look to see if there's a new breakthrough or answer in this disease area. And I'm desperate to see one. But I do believe genuinely in the next 5 to 10 years, there will be some big breakthroughs. And that's because we have increased power of studies in omics, metabolomics, proteomics, genomics. The Decode ME study is a huge 25,000 patient genome-wide association study, which will start to bring questions which may eventually reveal answers. And with many hundreds of thousands of patients suffering from long COVID, awareness will grow. The economic cost to all of us, taxpayers and society, of post-viral disease is such that we need the government to fund more large-scale research, and we need more biomedical solutions, and they will come.
In our family, we have 3 out of 5 with a diagnosis of ME. And I think you've had some experience of more than one in the family as well. And I wonder whether you could just say something about that, and whether it's common or uncommon.
Well, I've actually spoken to quite a few families who've got more than one family member. And if they don't have a family member with ME, they've often got some or other autoimmune disease in a first or second degree relative. So for me, my family history was that my maternal grandmother developed ME after a series of viral infections, including adult chickenpox and then pleurisy, when she was in her early 30s, and then spent the next decade slowly deteriorating and seeking help from many different medical establishments and hospitals, eventually ending up in a mental asylum with what was thought to be disseminated sclerosis, which was sort of a neurological disease, and many people probably had MS who were diagnosed with disseminated sclerosis, and also hysteria. Some days she could get up out of the bed and walk, and other days she couldn't. She lost weight and deteriorated and died aged 42 with bed sores and weighing approximately 5 stone. My mum was a young girl at the time, so grew up, her and her sisters had no mum. And when I first started getting ill, I had a lot of dizziness, word finding difficulties, neurological symptoms that reminded my mum of her mum. And she said it's like history repeating itself, and that family link, I believe, is quite strong. One of the things that motivates me to educate the medical profession about this disease is I have 2 children, and my biggest fear is if they were as ill as I have been, how I would cope as a parent. I think it would be the worst thing ever, worse than having it myself. And I have to make sure that the next generation are better protected than we were.
This, you mentioned Decode ME. They're trying to recruit 25,000 people with ME to take part in this genetic study, the largest study, genetic study ever into the illness. And we'll put a link up to that as well, so that people can get involved in it. They're up to 10,000, they're going for 25. Well, I want to
They're
thank you.
including people with long COVID as well. There's a subset
Yes.
of people with long COVID who are allowed to.
Yes. Do they have to have? Do they have to have gone on to have an ME diagnosis, or do you know?
No.
No. So people with long COVID can take part too.
Yes.
Okay.
There is a questionnaire at the start, so it
Yeah.
might be that they have to have typical features, but I'd recommend that anybody just look online and try and find out more and see if they can be involved.
But we'll put a link up to it at the end of this. We've all 3 in my family have done it. It's they needed some help with the questionnaire, but it's a spit test. You just have to provide a little bit of saliva into a tube and stick it in an envelope and send it back. So it's not difficult to do. So I want to say thank you, Nina, for meeting me here on the mountaintop today, and for all you're doing to make the sun rise for people with ME by raising awareness and understanding about the illness amongst your fellow health professionals and the wider world. And it's been a privilege to be able to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for all that you are doing, and for wanting to talk to me. I'm very keen to advocate for people who are too ill to speak for themselves.